Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The tour guide's smile never reached her eyes when she said we'd be fine as long as we followed the rules. She just didn't mention which rules actually mattered. My name's Marcus, and last week I discovered why some knowledge stays buried in New Orleans. If you're listening to this late at night, good. The darkness helps you understand what I'm about to tell you. But before I continue, tell me in the comments. Have you ever felt watched in a place where you knew, absolutely knew, you were alone? Because that feeling might be the only thing that saves you one day. Now, let the story begin. The humidity hit me like a wet blanket when I stepped off the streetcar on Canal Street. October in New Orleans feels different from anywhere else. Thick air that carries whispers from 300 years of history. I'd been a paranormal investigator for 12 years, mostly debunking fake hauntings in suburban houses where the only spirits were drafts from bad insulation. But my YouTube channel needed content, and St. Louis Cemetery number. One had been calling to me since I'd first heard about Marie Laveau's tomb. The tour group gathered near the cemetery gates at 3 p.m. 12 tourists clutching water bottles and phones, ready for Instagram moments between the crumbling tombs. Our guide, Celeste, wore a purple sundress that seemed too cheerful for a graveyard tour. Her voice carried that practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd given this speech 1,000 times. Welcome, everyone. Before we enter, let me share the 3 golden rules. She held up her fingers. 1. Stay with the group. 2. Don't touch the tombs. And 3. Be respectful. These are resting places after all. Simple enough, I'd heard these same rules at every cemetery tour from Boston to San Diego. But as we walked through those rusted gates, I noticed something. Celeste's hand trembled slightly as she touched the iron. Just for a second, like someone fighting the urge to pull their hand away from something hot. The cemetery sprawled before us. A city of the dead with its whitewashed tombs stacked like apartment buildings. The paths between them created narrow corridors that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. October's sun beat down, but shadows pooled in places where shadows shouldn't exist at 3 in the afternoon. St. Louis Cemetery number 1 opened in 1789, Celeste recited, leading us past a tomb with fresh red X's marked on its side. Due to the high water table, we bury our dead above ground here in New Orleans. A woman from Minnesota asked about the X's. Celeste gave her rehearsed answer about people making wishes at Marie Laveau's tomb, leaving offerings. But she walked a little faster past certain sections, her eyes never quite focusing on specific tombs. I hung back, filming everything for my channel. Through my camera lens, I noticed details the others missed. Fresh flowers on graves with dates from the 1800s. Scratches on tomb doors that looked like they came from the inside. A child's toy, a wooden horse, placed carefully on a ledge, its paint fresh despite the tomb bearing the date 1823. Marcus, stay with the group, please, Celeste called back, that never-reaching smile fixed in place. But I'd already seen him, a groundskeeper in the distance, watching us from between 2 mausoleums. When our eyes met, he shook his head slowly, deliberately. Then he held up 4 fingers. Not 3. 4. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those 4 fingers. I sat in my French Quarter Airbnb, editing footage from the tour. The AC hummed, fighting against October's stubborn heat. On my laptop screen, I watched myself walking through the cemetery, noting something odd. In several frames, there were shadows where no tourist stood. Shapes that seemed to follow just outside the group's periphery. At midnight, I made a decision that changed everything. The cemetery gates were locked, of course. but iron fences built in 1789 have ways of developing gaps if you know where to look. I'd done my research, found mentions in old forums about a section where the fence had settled, creating a space just wide enough for someone determined enough. The cemetery at night was different. During the day, it felt like a museum, history preserved behind invisible barriers. But now, the tombs seemed to breathe. Marble expanded and contracted in the cooling air, creating whispers that sounded almost like voices. My flashlight carved through darkness thick as molasses, revealing names and dates that seemed to rearrange themselves when the light moved away. I'd been inside maybe 10 minutes when I heard footsteps. Not the random settling of old stone, but deliberate, measured steps on the gravel path. I clicked off my flashlight and pressed myself against a tomb wall. The marble felt warm, too warm for midnight. "You shouldn't be here." The voice came from directly beside me, though I'd seen no one approach. I spun around. The groundskeeper from earlier stood there, though I hadn't heard him get that close. Up close, his face looked wrong, like someone had described a human face to an artist who'd never seen one. All the features were there, but arranged slightly off. "I'm sorry, You broke rule number 4. He interrupted, his voice carrying an accent I couldn't place. Not Creole, not Cajun, something older. Celeste only mentioned 3 rules. He laughed, but it sounded like wind through broken glass. "Celeste tells tourists what they want to hear. 3 rules sound manageable. 4 rules. 4 suggests danger, bad for business." My hand found my phone in my pocket, ready to run or call for help. But the groundskeeper just stood there, patient as stone. "What's the 4th rule?" I asked. "Never enter alone." He glanced around the cemetery. During the day, the living outnumber the dead. Their presence, their noise. It keeps things balanced, but at night. He trailed off, then looked directly at me. "At night, you're outnumbered." A sound echoed from deeper in the cemetery, like a door opening, a heavy stone door. "They know you're here now," the groundskeeper said. "The real question is whether they'll let you leave." They. But when I looked back, he was gone. Not walked away. Gone, like he'd never been there at all. The sound came again, closer this time. Stone grinding against stone. And then I heard something that made my blood crystallize in my veins. My name, whispered from inside one of the tombs. Marcus. Not shouted, not moaned. Whispered, conversationally, like someone calling a friend over for coffee. I ran. But here's the thing about cemetery paths at night. They don't lead where they did during the day. I'd entered from the north side, I was sure of it. But every path seemed to curve back toward the center, toward the older sections where the tombs pressed closer together and the dates grew harder to read. My flashlight flickered. Battery at 70%, but flickering anyway. In those moments of darkness between the flickers, I saw them, figures standing on top of the tombs, perfectly still, waiting. The whispers grew louder. Not my name anymore, but conversations, hundreds of overlapping voices discussing me, my life, things no one else could know. The nightmare I had when I was 7 about drowning in my grandmother's pool. The real reason I'd started investigating the paranormal, trying to contact my brother who'd died in Afghanistan. They knew it all. Then I saw her, a woman in a Victorian dress standing in the middle of the path. Not transparent like movie ghosts, solid, real, but her feet didn't quite touch the ground, and her dress moved in wind that didn't exist. "You're looking for answers," she said, her voice like autumn leaves. "Everyone who comes here alone is looking for answers. I just want to leave." She smiled, and I understood why Celeste's smiles never reached her eyes. In places like this, complete smiles attracted attention. Leave? But you just arrived, and we've been waiting so long for someone who can see us. Really see us. My phone buzzed. 3 a.m. I'd been in the cemetery for 3 hours, but it felt like 30 minutes. Time moves differently when you're the only living thing in sight. The woman in Victorian dress circled me slowly. Her movement was wrong, like someone had filmed her walking and removed every other frame. Jerky, unnatural, but her eyes never left mine. Do you know what happens to those who break the fourth rule, Marcus? I backed against a tomb. The marble now felt ice cold despite the humid night. Please, I didn't know. Ignorance. She paused, tilting her head at an angle that hurt to look at. Ignorance is why we're all here. Ignorance of rules, of boundaries, of which doors should stay closed. Behind her, more figures emerged from between the tombs. Men in Civil War uniforms with wounds that never healed. Children in clothing from centuries I couldn't identify. A jazz musician holding a trumpet that gleamed despite the tarnish of age. They all shared that same quality. Solid, but not quite there. Like reality couldn't quite decide if they existed or not. You want to leave? The woman continued, but leaving requires understanding. Tell me, Marcus, why do you think we bury the dead? My throat felt lined with sand. To lay them to rest. She laughed, and every figure laughed with her. The sound echoed off marble and stone until it became a physical thing pressing against my eardrums. Rest, what a comfortable lie the living tell themselves. We bury the dead to keep them separate, to maintain the boundary. But boundaries weaken, especially here, where the dead outnumber the living 1,000 to 1. The jazz musician raised his trumpet. The first note cut through the night like a blade made of sound. It was beautiful and terrible. A melody that seemed to pull at something deep in my chest. Other instruments joined, invisible in the darkness. A funeral dirge played backward, or maybe inside out. Every night, the woman said, moving closer, we wait. For someone foolish enough, or brave enough, to cross over alone, to become the bridge. The bridge to what? She reached out her hand. I knew with every cell in my body, that if she touched me, something fundamental would change. The music grew louder. My flashlight died completely, leaving only moonlight filtered through clouds that hadn't been there moments before. That's when I heard it, a voice cutting through the supernatural symphony. Human, alive, angry. You damn fool tourists never learn. A flashlight beam, brilliant and steady, cut through the darkness. The groundskeeper stood at the entrance to the path, but different from before. More solid, more real. In his other hand, he held something that gleamed. A brass compass. The woman in Victorian dress hissed, actually hissed, like static on a dead television channel. He has no authority here, not anymore. The groundskeeper laughed, that same broken glass sound, but directed at them now. Authority? Marie gave me authority in 1962. Or did you forget, Delphine? The name hit the woman like a physical blow. She flickered. Her dress momentarily became a blood-stained apron. Her face. God, her face became something else for just a second. Something that had done terrible things in a mansion on Royal Street. You cannot keep taking them, the groundskeeper said, walking forward. The figures parted before him like smoke. The balance must be maintained. The balance broke long ago, Eugene. The woman, Delphine, gathered herself. When they stopped believing, stopped leaving offerings, stopped remembering the proper ways, Eugene, I realized the groundskeeper had a name, had a story. He held up the compass, and I saw it wasn't pointing north, it was pointing toward me. This one's marked, Eugene said. Look closer. Delphine approached me again, but cautiously now. Her eyes narrowed, then widened. He's been touched before. Someone in his bloodline. My mind raced. My grandmother. She'd lived in New Orleans in the 1950s. Told stories about Marie Laveau's tomb. Said she'd been saved once, but never elaborated. The debt passes down, Eugene explained to me while keeping his eyes on Delphine. Your grandmother knew the real rules. All 7 of them. 7! My voice cracked. You said 4. 4's enough to keep you alive. 7's enough to keep you safe. He pulled something from his pocket. A photograph, old and yellowed. This, you? I looked. It was my grandmother, young, standing next to Marie Laveau's tomb. But there was someone else in the photo. A man who looked exactly like me. Exactly. That's your grandmother, Eugene said. And that's you. 40 years before you were born. The photograph trembled in my hands. It was impossible. But there I stood in 1952, next to my grandmother, both of us smiling at something outside the frame. Time doesn't work the same in places like this, Eugene explained, keeping his compass raised toward the gathering spirits. Your grandmother made a deal. Saved her life, but complicated things. Delphine laughed, bitter and sharp. Complicated. He means cursed. Your bloodline is tangled in the cemetery's web now, Marcus. You can leave tonight, but you'll always return, in one form or another. The jazz music had stopped. The silence felt heavier than the sound had been. Around us, the spirits waited, watched. Some looked sympathetic, others hungry. What kind of deal? I asked, though part of me already knew. Eugene glanced at me, his not quite right face showing something like pity. She was dying. Cancer. Came here alone in 1952, looking for Marie Laveau's tomb, looking for a miracle. She found something else. She found us, Delphine added. The permanent residence. We offered her life. Time to have children. To see them grow, in exchange. In exchange for what? One from each generation must return. Must spend one night among us. Alone. If they survive until dawn, the deal continues. If they don't... She didn't need to finish. I understood. My grandmother had lived to 93. My father had died at 30 in a car accident. Or so I'd been told. Now I wondered. Had he come here? Had he failed some test I was now facing? How long until dawn? I asked. Eugene checked his watch, an anachronism that somehow made him more unsettling. 3 hours, but time, as I said, it's negotiable here. The spirits pressed closer. I could feel their cold, their desperate need for warmth, for life, for just a moment of feeling real again. Delphine stood directly in front of me now. 3 hours or 3 centuries. It makes no difference. You want to know the 5th rule, Marcus? The one even Eugene won't tell you? Eugene stepped forward. Delphine, don't. The 5th rule, she continued, her smile widening to show too many teeth, is that the dead don't lie. We can't. It's the curse of clarity. So when I tell you that your brother didn't die in Afghanistan, you'll know it's true. My world tilted. What? He died here 3 years ago. Came looking for you, actually. You'd mentioned the cemetery in one of your videos. He wanted to surprise you, came at night, alone. No. But even as I denied it, pieces clicked into place. The closed casket, the military's vague explanations, my mother's insistence that I never come to New Orleans. Eugene's compass spun wildly. She's broken the concordat. Marcus, you need to run, now. The rules are void when they tell you truths you're not ready to hear. But I couldn't move. My brother, David, he'd been here. In this place. Alone and afraid and... He's still here, Delphine whispered. Would you like to see him? The spirits parted, creating a pathway deeper into the cemetery. At the end, barely visible in the moonlight, a figure in military fatigues stood motionless. David? The name tore from my throat. The figure's head turned. Even at this distance, I recognized the gesture, the way he'd always turned when I called his name. Slightly to the left first, then centering, a quirk from a childhood ear infection. I took a step toward him. Eugene grabbed my arm. His touch burned cold. That's not your brother anymore. It's what the cemetery made from your memories of him. But he's right there. The 6th rule, Eugene said urgently. Never trust what you want to see. The cemetery feeds on desire, on grief, on guilt. The figure in fatigues started walking toward us. Each step was perfect, exactly how David walked. But as he got closer, I saw what Eugene meant. It was David, but like a photograph of David that had been copied too many times. Each detail correct, but somehow degraded, simplified. "Mark," it said in David's voice, "I've been waiting for you. Why didn't you come sooner?" Tears burned my eyes. "I didn't know. God, David, I didn't know." "The 7th rule," Eugene whispered. "The most important one. The one your grandmother learned too late." The David thing stood just out of reach now, holding out its hand. My brother's hand. The scar from when he'd tried to make me a treehouse and cut himself with the saw. It was all there. Perfect. Terrible. "What's the 7th rule?" I asked, not taking my eyes off my brother's replica. Eugene's voice came heavy with centuries of sorrow. "The cemetery doesn't just take. It replaces. Every person who enters alone and doesn't leave, someone else takes their place in the world. Someone who looks like them, acts like them, but isn't them." My blood turned to ice water. My grandmother, after 1952. Was your grandmother, mostly, enough to live a life, have children, but part of her stayed here, part of everyone who makes a deal stays here. I understood now. The family stories about how grandmother changed after her recovery, became different, quieter, how she'd sometimes stare at nothing and whisper names no one recognized. So, if I leave, part of you stays. And something that looks like you, sounds like you, will live your life, make your videos, but it won't be you. Not completely. The David thing smiled. David's smile. "It's not so bad, Mark. I'm still me, just distributed differently." Dawn couldn't be far now. The sky showed the barest hint of lighter black at the eastern edge. But the spirits grew more solid as the darkness began its retreat, as if they were racing against time. "Choose," Delphine said. "Stay willingly, and keep yourself whole. Leave, and leave pieces behind. Or," she gestured to the David thing, "take his place. Let him return, a brother for a brother." The David thing's eyes lit up with hope. Real hope. Or a perfect imitation of it. "Mark, please. I want to go home. I want to see Mom." Every instinct screamed at me to save him, to take his place. It's what the living David would have done for me. But Eugene's words echoed. This wasn't David. It was what the cemetery had made from him. "There's another way," Eugene said suddenly. "But it requires breaking all 7 rules, deliberately, simultaneously." Delphine spun toward him. "You wouldn't dare. The consequences. The consequences are mine to bear. I've been groundskeeper for 60 years. It's time someone else took the job." He handed me the compass. The moment it touched my skin, I felt it. The weight of every spirit in the cemetery, their stories, their deaths, their desperate need to be remembered correctly, not as ghosts or monsters, but as people who'd once lived and loved and lost. "Break the rules," Eugene said. "All 7, right now." And the cycle resets, your family's debt paid, but someone has to stay to maintain the new balance. You? He smiled, and for the first time his face looked completely human. I died in 1963. Been pretending otherwise ever since. It's time I stopped pretending. The David thing reached for me. Don't listen to him, Mark. We can be together, just like before. But I'd made my decision. I spoke loudly, clearly, my voice carrying across the cemetery. I entered alone. Rule 4. Broken. I trusted what I wanted to see. Rule 6. Broken. I believed the dead could lie. Rule 5. Broken. The spirits began to fade. Delphine shrieked, a sound like tearing silk. I'm here to communicate with the dead. Rule 1. Broken. I touched the tombs. Rule 2. Broken. I showed no respect. Rule 3. Broken. The David thing flickered. For just a moment I saw my real brother. The actual David. He smiled and nodded. Then he was gone. And Rule 7, I said, my voice breaking. I choose to leave whole, no deals, no replacements. The cycle ends. The compass in my hand crumbled to dust. Around me, the cemetery erupted in a sound like 1,000 doors slamming shut. Then, silence. Eugene stood before me, but transformed. Younger, clearer, free. Go, he said. Dawn's here. And remember, the real rules aren't about the dead. They're about the living. About knowing when to hold on and when to let go. I ran. This time, the paths led where they should. The gates appeared exactly where I'd entered. I squeezed through the gap in the fence just as the first true rays of sunlight painted the tombs gold. Behind me, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 looked exactly as it had during the tour. Historical, peaceful, safe. But I knew better now. I uploaded this video 3 days ago. The comments section exploded. People claiming they've seen the groundskeeper. Others saying their families have similar stories, similar deals. A few even sent photographs, old ones, where they swear they can see themselves in the background. Decades before they were born. Celeste messaged me yesterday. She said there's a new groundskeeper at the cemetery. A young man who looks familiar, but she can't place him. He's very strict about the rules, all 3 of them. She emphasized the number. 3. But sometimes, she says, tourists report seeing him hold up different numbers of fingers. 4, 5, 6, 7. And every time those tourists leave quickly and never come back alone. But that's not where the story ends. Because 3 weeks after my encounter, the dreams started getting worse. Not just the ones where I'm wearing Eugene's uniform. These dreams felt different, more real, like memories that didn't belong to me. I dream of the cemetery during other time periods. I watch yellow fever victims being interred in 1853. I witness Marie Laveau herself performing rituals by moonlight in 1875. I see the first tourists arriving in the 1960s, their cameras flashing against the marble like small lightning strikes. And in every dream, I'm there, watching, waiting, learning the patterns that govern life and death in New Orleans. The thing that scares me most isn't being there in these historical moments. It's how natural it feels. How right it seems that I should be standing guard between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. I've started researching my family's history more deeply. What I found chills me to the bone. My grandmother's recovery from cancer wasn't the beginning of my family's connection to the cemetery. It goes back further. Much further. My great-great-grandfather, Matthias, disappeared in New Orleans in 1892. Family records say he died of consumption, but I found newspaper clippings that tell a different story. He was last seen entering St. Louis Cemetery number, one at midnight, claiming he'd received a message from his deceased wife. His body was never found. My great-grandfather, Thomas, had episodes starting in 1923. He'd disappear for days, returning with no memory of where he'd been. But neighbors reported seeing someone who looked exactly like him walking through the French Quarter during those missing days. Someone who moved wrong, spoke wrong. Someone who wasn't quite Thomas. The pattern goes back generations. Each family member touched by the cemetery. Each one changed by the encounter. And now it's my turn. The worst part? I'm starting to understand Eugene's decision. The weight of maintaining the balance between life and death isn't a burden. It's a calling. Every night I feel the pull. The cemetery needs a guardian. Someone who understands both worlds. Someone who can enforce the rules that keep the dead from overwhelming the living. Yesterday, I caught myself researching flights to New Orleans. Not for a video, not for investigation, just to go home. Because that's what it feels like now. Like the cemetery is home in a way nowhere else has ever been. I've been getting messages from viewers who claim they've had similar experiences. Not just in New Orleans, but in old cemeteries across the country. Père Lachaise in Paris, Highgate in London. Even small, rural graveyards in places like Salem, Oregon, and Savannah, Georgia. The dead, it seems, follow similar patterns everywhere. And they're all looking for guardians. One message particularly disturbed me. A woman in Boston sent me a photograph taken at Mount Auburn Cemetery. In the background, barely visible among the headstones, stands a figure in groundskeeper's clothes. The photograph was taken last week, but the figure looks exactly like Eugene. The same face, the same posture, the same brass compass glinting in his hand. Either Eugene didn't find peace when the cycle reset, or there are others like him. Guardians maintaining balance in cemeteries around the world. All of them once living people who made the choice to protect the boundary between life and death. And I'm starting to think the choice isn't really a choice at all. It's an inevitability, a calling that runs in certain bloodlines, a responsibility passed down through generations of people who can see the dead for what they truly are. Not monsters or angels, but lost souls who need guidance, who need someone to maintain the rules that keep both worlds safe. Tonight, I'm flying to New Orleans, not to film a video, not to investigate, to accept what I now understand is my inheritance, my duty, my destiny. Because someone has to hold up the fingers, someone has to count the rules, someone has to stand guard between the living and the dead, and that someone, I'm finally ready to admit, has always been me. If you're still listening, if you made it this far. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why we're so afraid of the dark? It's not the darkness itself, it's the knowledge, buried deep in our DNA, that we're never truly alone in it, and in places where the dead outnumber the living. Well, the rules exist for a reason, all 7 of them, whether you know them or not. Sweet dreams. And remember, if you ever visit New Orleans, take the day tour. Trust me on this one. Some rules, the most important ones. They never tell the tourists, because bad for business is better than the alternative. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like you've been somewhere before you were born? Or better yet, has anyone in your family ever changed? Really changed? After visiting a place they shouldn't have been? I'm still trying to understand what happened that night. Maybe you can help me figure it out, because I've been having dreams. Dreams where I'm standing in that cemetery. But in the dreams, I'm wearing a groundskeeper's uniform, and I'm holding up fingers, counting rules for tourists who don't know they're already broken. Story number 2. Listen, I need to tell you something that happened last Tuesday night. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about working the graveyard shift at St. Mary's Hospital in Portland, Maine. Before you think I'm crazy, just hear me out. Because what I saw in that basement morgue, what opened those doors from the inside, it's still down there. And if you work nights in any hospital, anywhere, You need to know what to look for. My name's Rachel. I've been a night shift nurse for 3 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. But Tuesday night changed that. Now, the story begins. The fluorescent lights hummed that particular frequency that only hospital lights seem to manage. You know the one. That barely audible buzz that gets under your skin after hour 3 of a 12-hour shift. I was making my rounds on the cardiac wing when Nancy from admin caught up to me, her sensible shoes squeaking against the freshly waxed linoleum. "Rachel, honey," she started, and I knew immediately something was off. Nancy only called people honey when she needed a favor, a big one. "What is it, Nancy?" I kept walking, checking my watch. 11:47 p.m. The witching hour was almost upon us. That's what we called midnight at St. Mary's. Not because we believed in that stuff, but because that's when things got weird. "I need you to cover basement intake tonight." She said it fast, like ripping off a Band-Aid. I stopped walking. "The morgue?" "Nancy, I'm cardiac. I work with the living. Jennifer called out sick, food poisoning, and Marcus is already covering ER. You're the only one with clearance who's available." The basement. Nobody liked the basement. It wasn't just the morgue down there. It was record storage, old equipment, and those long, narrow hallways that seemed to go on forever. The kind of hallways where the lights never quite reached the corners. "Fine," I sighed. "But you owe me. Big time." Nancy squeezed my shoulder. "Just until 4 a.m. Then Tom comes in for the morning prep." As I headed toward the service elevator, I grabbed my cardigan from the break room. It was always cold in the basement. Always, even in July, even when the rest of the hospital ran hot. Maintenance said it was necessary for preservation. But sometimes I wondered if it was something else entirely. The elevator descended slowly, too slowly. Each floor dinged past. 3rd, 2nd, 1st, basement. The doors opened with a grinding sound that made my teeth ache. The hallway stretched before me, those flickering fluorescents creating pools of light and shadow. I could hear the ventilation system breathing, in and out, like the building itself was alive. The morgue was at the end of the hall, past the old psychiatric records room, past the abandoned kitchen from when this wing served meals back in the 70s. My footsteps echoed despite my soft-soled nursing shoes. I reached the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and swiped my badge. The lock clicked open with a sound like breaking bones. Or maybe that was just my imagination running wild. Inside, the morgue was exactly what you'd expect. Stainless steel everything. Those drawer units built into the wall. 12 of them. Each one currently occupied according to the clipboard hanging by the door. The examination tables sat empty in the center of the room, their surfaces reflecting the harsh overhead lights. I settled into the small desk near the entrance, pulling out my phone to pass the time. The Wi-Fi didn't reach down here, of course it didn't, so I opened my Kindle app and tried to lose myself in a romance novel. Anything to avoid thinking about the 12 bodies lying just 20 feet away. That's when I heard it. A soft thump, like someone knocking, but not from the hallway, from inside the room. I looked up from my phone, straining to listen. The ventilation system hummed. The lights buzzed. Nothing else. I went back to reading. Thump. This time I stood up. The sound was coming from the wall of drawers. My rational mind kicked in. Sometimes bodies release gases. Sometimes they move. It's completely normal, completely natural. I'd learned about it in nursing school. I walked over to the wall, checking each drawer's label. John Doe, brought in yesterday. Margaret Chen, age 87, natural causes. Timothy Morrison, car accident. Thump, thump. Drawer number 7. According to the label, it contained Sarah Williams, age 34, cause of death pending investigation. She'd been brought in 3 days ago. I placed my hand on the drawer handle. The metal was ice cold, colder than it should have been even in this refrigerated room. My breath came out in small puffs of vapor. Just gases, I whispered to myself. Just natural decomposition. I pulled the drawer open. Sarah Williams lay there exactly as she should have been. Pale, still. The toe tag reading her case number. Everything normal, except her eyes were open. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth. In 3 years of nursing, I'd seen plenty of bodies. Sometimes their eyes were open. It happened. But these eyes, they weren't clouded with death. They were clear, blue, and they were looking at me. No, that was impossible. I leaned closer, my hand reaching out to close her eyelids. Standard procedure. Her hand grabbed my wrist. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The cold of her touch shot up my arm like electricity, freezing my voice in my throat. Her grip was impossibly strong for someone who'd been dead for 3 days. Her mouth opened. No breath came out. How could it? But I heard words anyway, not through my ears, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere in the base of my skull where primitive fears lived. He's coming back. Then her hand fell away. Her eyes clouded over. She was dead again, or still dead, or had never been anything but dead. I slammed the drawer shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the simple motion. My wrist bore 5 perfect finger marks, already turning purple despite the fact that bruises shouldn't form that fast. I backed toward the desk, never taking my eyes off drawer 7. My rational mind was screaming at me. Hallucination. Exhaustion. Too much caffeine. Anything but what I thought I'd just experienced. That's when I heard the other drawers. Thump, thump, thump. Not just one now. Multiple drawers, multiple bodies. All knocking from inside their metal coffins. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My breath came out in thick clouds now. The overhead lights flickered. Not just flickered, but dimmed and brightened in a rhythm. Like a heartbeat. I reached for the door, ready to run, ready to abandon my post and face whatever consequences came later. But the handle wouldn't turn. My badge wouldn't scan. The door was locked from the outside, or something was holding it shut from within. That's when drawer 3 opened by itself. The drawer slid out slowly, deliberately, like someone savoring the dramatic moment. Inside lay Marcus Thompson, according to his tag. 62 years old. Heart attack. But Marcus Thompson sat up. Not quickly, not like in the movies where corpses suddenly spring to life. He sat up slowly, mechanically. His movements jerky and wrong, like a marionette with an inexperienced puppeteer pulling the strings. His head turned toward me with a series of small, clicking sounds. Vertebrae that shouldn't move anymore adjusting themselves. His mouth opened, and that same voiceless voice filled my head. He's using us. More drawers began to open. One by one, the dead were sitting up, turning their heads toward me, their mouths moving in unison now. He's in the walls. I pressed myself against the locked door, my fingers frantically entering the override code on the keypad. Nothing. The lights went out completely for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of absolute darkness where I could hear them moving, hear their bodies sliding across steel, hear their feet hitting the floor with wet, soft sounds. When the lights came back on, they were standing, all 12 of them, in a semicircle around me, their eyes. God, their eyes were all wrong. Not dead, not alive, but something in between. Something borrowed. Sarah Williams was closest to me. She reached out one pale hand and touched the wall beside my head. Where her fingers made contact, frost spread across the paint in spiraling patterns. "Look," she said, and this time I heard it with my ears. A whisper like wind through empty rooms. "Look at what he makes us do." She pressed harder, and the wall began to crack. No, not crack. The paint was peeling away, revealing something underneath. Something that had been hidden beneath layers and layers of hospital white. Symbols, carved deep into the concrete. Symbols that hurt to look at, that made my eyes water and my head pound. They covered the entire wall, spreading out from behind the paint like a disease. "How long," I managed to whisper, "how long have those been there?" Marcus Thompson's corpse turned its head toward me with another series of clicks. "Since the beginning, since they built this place on the old ground, the old ground. I'd heard rumors when I first started working here. St. Mary's was built in 1952, but before that, this land had been something else. The old-timers wouldn't talk about it, just said it was better not to know." "Who is he?" I asked, surprised that I could form words at all. "Who's doing this?" All 12 corpses pointed at once. Not at the walls, not at the door, down. They pointed straight down, through the floor, to whatever lay beneath the basement of St. Mary's Hospital. The temperature dropped again. Ice was forming on the examination tables now, spreading across the stainless steel like living things. My cardigan did nothing against this cold. This was the kind of cold that came from somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't supposed to touch our world. That's when I heard the new sound. Not thumping, not knocking. Footsteps, coming from below. Not below as in another floor. There was nothing below the basement. Below as in underground. Under the foundation. Under the earth itself. The corpses all turned their heads toward the sound, moving in perfect synchronization. Their mouths opened, and they spoke in unison, their voice a chorus of the wrongly living. "He wakes every 7 years. Tonight is the 7th year." The footsteps were getting closer, and now I could hear something else, breathing. Wet, labored breathing like someone with fluid in their lungs. But bigger, much bigger than human lungs could ever be. The floor in the center of the room began to crack. The cracks spread from the center like a spider web, chunks of concrete falling away into darkness below. The corpses stepped back, forming a wider circle, their dead eyes never leaving the growing hole in the floor. I should have run. Should have thrown myself against that door until it broke, or I did. But I couldn't move. Something held me there. Not physically, but something deeper. The same instinct that makes you unable to look away from a car accident. The terrible need to know. To see. A hand emerged from the hole. But calling it a hand wasn't quite right. It had 5 fingers, yes, but they were too long, each joint having an extra segment. And the skin was transparent. I could see dark fluid pumping through veins that branched and rebranched in patterns that made my stomach turn. The thing pulled itself up slowly. It wore a doctor's coat, or what had once been a doctor's coat. The fabric was stained with substances I didn't want to identify, and it hung loosely on a frame that was almost human, but not quite. Too tall, too thin. Joints that bent in too many places. Its face, God help me, I recognized its face. From the old photographs in the administrative wing, Dr. Eugene Whitmore, the hospital's first chief of staff. He'd disappeared in 1959, exactly 7 years after the hospital opened. They said he'd run off with a nurse, but looking at this thing wearing his face like an ill-fitting mask, I knew that wasn't true. "Hello, my dear," it said, and its voice was cultured, pleasant, completely at odds with the horror of its appearance. "I do apologize for the dramatic entrance. The children here," it gestured at the standing corpses, "they do get excitable when I wake. What are you?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. It tilted its head, that neck bending in a way that made my eyes water. "I am what I have always been. A healer, a researcher, someone who understood that death is not final. It's merely a transition state. The thing that had been Dr. Whitmore moved closer, its 2 long fingers trailing across the examination table, leaving marks in the frost. This hospital was built for me, you see, built on the old ground, where the barriers are thin, where I could continue my work. Your work? I pressed myself harder against the door, feeling the symbols on the wall pulse with cold energy behind me. Life after death, my dear. True, life after death. Not the spiritual nonsense they preach upstairs, but scientific resurrection, chemical reanimation, electrical restoration. Its face split into a smile that revealed too many teeth. I succeeded, as you can see. You're killing people, I said, anger suddenly flaring through my fear. These people, they had families. Had, yes, past tense. Now they have purpose. It gestured and the corpses moved closer, their dead faces somehow managing expressions of contentment. Every 7 years, I wake. I check my work, I make adjustments, and I select new subjects. The implications hit me like cold water. Select, you mean? Oh yes, some deaths in this hospital are quite natural, others. It shrugged, a motion that rippled through its body in ways that defied anatomy. Others are recruited. The young woman there, Sarah, she had such potential. A strong will, perfect for my needs. Sarah Williams' corpse turned to look at me, and for just a moment, I saw something in those dead eyes. Not the thing controlling her, but her. The real Sarah, trapped inside her own dead body, screaming silently for help that would never come. You can't. Someone will stop you. Someone will notice. Dr. Whitmore laughed, a sound like grinding glass. My dear child, who do you think writes the death certificates? Who do you think runs this hospital? The board of directors, half of them are mine, have been for decades. Different faces, same souls. Death is a revolving door here at St. Mary's. The lights flickered again, and in the darkness, I saw them all differently. Not just the 12 corpses, but shadows of others. Dozens, hundreds. All the suspicious deaths, all the unexplained disappearances over the years. They were all here, in the walls, in the foundation, in the very bones of the building. In that moment of darkness, memories flooded back. Things I'd dismissed, explained away, rationalized. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been recovering beautifully from her surgery until she suddenly took a turn in the night. The young father who'd come in with minor chest pains and never made it home to his children. The teenager who'd survived the car crash that killed her friends, only to die of complications that didn't make sense. I'd been here for 3 years. 3 years of deaths that felt wrong but looked right on paper. 3 years of questions I'd been too afraid to ask, too comfortable to pursue. How many of them had I walked past in the hallways? How many times had I unknowingly delivered them to their fate? Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because, my dear Rachel. And hearing my name in that thing's mouth made my skin crawl. You're going to join us. Oh, not tonight. Tonight you're going to go back upstairs. You're going to finish your shift, you're going to go home, and in exactly 3 days you're going to have an accident. Something tragic but believable. And then you'll come back here to drawer number 13. We're adding another row, you see, and you'll help me with my work. The casual way it spoke about my death, my future imprisonment in rotting flesh, sent ice through my veins that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold filling the room. But there was something else in its voice, something that made me pay closer attention. No. The word came out stronger than I felt. I won't. I'll tell everyone. You'll tell them what? That the dead walk in the basement. That a 70-year-old disappearance case is actually a monster living under the hospital. It moved closer, close enough that I could smell it. formaldehyde and something sweeter, something rotten. They'll think you've had a breakdown. Stress of the job, and when you have your little accident, everyone will say they saw it coming. The corpses all smiled in unison, their faces cracking with the effort. But I noticed something Dr. Whitmore didn't seem to see. The smiles weren't quite synchronized. Sarah Williams' smile came a half-second late, and in that delay, I saw her eyes flicker. Not with his borrowed consciousness, but with her own. She was fighting. They were all fighting, somewhere deep inside their hijacked bodies. Unless... Dr. Whitmore paused, one long finger tapping against its chin. Unless you'd prefer to make a deal. My heart, which had been racing, seemed to stop. What kind of deal? You work the night shift, yes? Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, you continue to do so. And sometimes, not often, just occasionally, you might notice certain patients taking turns for the worse. You might be asked to administer certain medications. You might be told to look the other way when certain bodies go missing from the morgue. As it spoke, I found myself studying the thing more carefully. The doctor's coat was old, decades old. The stains weren't random, they formed patterns, ritualistic patterns. And the way it moved, the way it spoke, there was something desperate underneath the confidence, something that needed my cooperation rather than simply taking what it wanted. You want me to help you kill people? I want you to help me evolve them. Death is not the end, Rachel. It's just another beginning. And in return, you get to keep living, really living, not like these poor things. It gestured at the corpses, but truly alive, for as long as you serve. The lights came back on fully, harsh and bright. The corpses were laying down again, sliding back into their drawers as if pulled by invisible strings. The hole in the floor was sealing itself, concrete flowing like water to fill the gaps. Within moments, the only sign anything had happened was the frost on the tables and the symbols on the wall, already fading as new paint seemed to grow over them like healing skin. Dr. Whitmore was sinking back into the floor, that horrible body folding in on itself in ways that made me want to vomit. 3 days, Rachel, it said as its head disappeared below the surface. 3 days to decide, help me, or join them. The choice is yours. The last drawer slammed shut. The temperature began to rise. The door behind me clicked open. I ran. God help me, I ran. Up the stairs, not waiting for the elevator, taking them 2 at a time until my lungs burned. I burst onto the cardiac floor just as my phone buzzed. 4 a.m. Tom would be arriving for the morning shift. Nancy found me in the break room, curled up in a chair, still shaking. Rough night? She asked, concern creasing her face. I looked at her, really looked at her. Was she one of them? Was she part of this? Or was she just Nancy, innocent Nancy who had no idea what lurked in the basement of St. Mary's Hospital? Just cold down there, I managed. She nodded sympathetically. I know, honey. That's why nobody likes basement duty. But hey, you made it through. You're tougher than you think. 3 days. I had 3 days. I went home that morning and tried to sleep. Tried to tell myself it was a hallucination. Stress, exhaustion, too much caffeine and too many horror podcasts. But the bruises on my wrist were real. 5 perfect finger marks that were already turning from purple to black. I called in sick for my Thursday shift. Spent the day researching St. Mary's Hospital. Found old newspaper articles about Dr. Eugene Whitmore. Brilliant surgeon, pioneer in experimental procedures. Disappeared without a trace in 1959, exactly 7 years after the hospital opened. Found other things too. Statistics that didn't quite add up. Mortality rates that spiked every 7 years. Employees who left suddenly without explanation. Or died in accidents, so many accidents. But I also found something else. something that gave me hope. The previous spike in mortality rates 7 years ago had been broken. Not completely. There were still unexplained deaths, still disappearances, but fewer than the pattern suggested there should have been. Someone had fought back. Someone had found a way to limit its power. Saturday came too quickly. Day 3, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone. I could run, pack everything, and just disappear. But something told me that wouldn't work. That wherever I went, I'd have an accident. That I'd end up back in drawer 13 no matter what. Or I could go to work, do my job, and make a choice. I'm writing this now, sitting in my car in the St. Mary's parking lot. It's 11:30 p.m. My shift starts in 30 minutes. I can see the hospital looming above me, all lit up against the Portland sky. Such a normal-looking building. Such a helpful place where lives are saved every day. But I know what's underneath. I know what waits in the basement. I know what walks the halls when the living aren't watching. I think about Sarah Williams, trapped in her own dead body. I think about all the others, all the souls recruited for Dr. Whitmore's twisted evolution. I think about the choice he gave me, help him or join them. But here's the thing. Here's what Dr. Whitmore didn't consider. I've been a nurse for 3 years. I've held the hands of the dying. I've watched families say goodbye. I've seen the peace that comes with a natural death and the horror that comes with an unnatural one. And I know, deep in my bones, that some things are worse than dying. Being his accomplice is one of them. So I'm going to go inside, I'm going to work my shift, and when he comes for me, when that accident happens, at least I'll know I didn't help him. At least I'll know I didn't become the monster. But if you're reading this, if you work nights at a hospital, any hospital, pay attention to the basement. Pay attention to the mortality rates. Pay attention to the doctors who've been there too long, whose faces never quite seem to age right. And if you ever hear knocking from inside the morgue drawers, run. Don't investigate. Don't be brave. Just run. Because the dead don't knock. But the things that use them do. And they're always recruiting. Always. Sweet dreams. And if you want to know what happened to me, if you want to know whether I'm still alive or residing in drawer 13, well, check the news for Portland, Maine. Look for a nurse named Rachel who had an unfortunate accident. Or better yet, come visit St. Mary's Hospital. Take the elevator to the basement. Walk past the old psychiatric records, past the abandoned kitchen. Find the morgue. And listen. Listen for the knocking. I might be the one knocking back. Tell me, have you ever worked a night shift? Have you ever been alone in a building where the walls seem to breathe? Where the shadows move when no one's watching? Because if you have, you already know. Some doors should never be opened. Especially from the inside, especially when you're not the one doing the opening. Story number 3. The GPS died exactly where they said it would. 48 miles from Portland. Not 47, not 49, 48 on the dot. Like the satellites themselves refuse to look at this place. I know what you're thinking. Another city person gets lost in the Oregon wilderness. Cries about it online, learns a valuable lesson about nature. But that's not what this is. I wish it was that simple. I really wish it was. Before I tell you what happened out there, past where the Forest Service stops their patrols, I need you to understand something. When locals warn you about a place, when even the rangers avoid certain trails after October, there's usually a reason. And it's never the reason you think. The story begins now. My name's Marcus. 3 weeks ago, I was just another software developer from Seattle, driving down to Eugene for a tech conference. I'd made this drive dozens of times. Interstate 5 South, straight shot, boring as watching paint dry. But October had painted the Cascade foothills in golds and reds that Saturday morning. And I thought, why not take the scenic route? Highway 26 through Mount Hood National Forest seemed perfect. My Tesla had a full charge. The weather app showed clear skies. What could go wrong? Everything was fine until I saw that handwritten sign, barely visible through the autumn fog. Scenic Overlook, 8 miles. Not an official Forest Service sign, just a wooden board with painted letters, the kind locals put up for their favorite spots. I should have kept driving. God, I should have kept driving. The turnoff was easy to miss, just a gap in the guardrail and a dirt road disappearing into Douglas firs so thick they blocked out the morning sun. My car's navigation system immediately threw a fit. GPS signal lost, returned to route, but I could see tire tracks in the mud. Fresh ones. Someone had been here recently. Maybe even that morning. How dangerous could it be? The first 2 miles were actually beautiful. Ferns brushed against my windows. Stellar's jays called from the canopy. I even saw a doe and her fawn picking their way through the underbrush. It felt like I'd discovered something special, something secret. Then I passed the first marker. It was just a tree, but someone had carved numbers into the bark. 48, that's all, just 48. I didn't think much of it, probably a trail marker or property boundary, but then I saw another one, and another, every 100 yards or so. Another tree with 48 carved deep into the wood. Some looked fresh. Others were old, grown over, distorted as the trees had tried to heal themselves. The road got rougher. My Tesla's low clearance meant I had to slow to a crawl, picking my way around roots and rocks. The forest pressed closer. Those massive firs gave way to something else. Trees I didn't recognize. Twisted things with bark that looked almost wet, like they were sweating. That's when I noticed the silence. You don't realize how much noise a forest makes until it stops. No birds, no insects. Even the sound of my tires on the dirt seemed muffled, like the trees were absorbing it. My podcast had cut out when I lost signal, and now the silence in the car felt heavy, oppressive. I checked my phone. No bars. The screen showed my location as nowhere. Just a gray void where the map should be. Even my downloaded offline maps showed nothing. Like this place didn't exist. 4 miles in, I found the abandoned ranger station. It squatted in a small clearing, a moss-covered building that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. The windows were intact but foggy with age. A Forest Service truck sat beside it, tires flat, rust eating through the green paint. The hood was open, like someone had been working on it when they left. I stopped. Part of me wanted to turn around right there, but the road had narrowed so much I'd have to reverse for miles. The smart thing would be to check if the station had a landline, maybe some maps, figure out where this road actually went. The door was unlocked. It opened with a groan that echoed through the empty building. Inside, everything was wrong. Not destroyed or vandalized, just wrong. A calendar on the wall showed October 1997, but the pages after that had been torn off, not torn out, torn off, like someone had ripped away the future. Coffee cups sat on desks, full of something black and solid. Paperwork covered every surface. Reports about irregular wildlife behavior and seismic anomalies. But the text was strange. Some sentences just ended mid-word. Others repeated the same phrase over and over. They walk between the trees, they walk between the trees, they walk between the trees. A map on the wall showed the Forest Service boundaries. Someone had drawn a red circle around an area about 48 miles from Portland. Inside the circle they'd written one word, don't. I found the logbook. The last entry was dated October 15th, 1997. It read, Patrol attempted recovery at mile marker 48. No contact for 72 hours. Discontinuing all operations in designated zone. May God forgive us for what we're leaving out there. But there was more. Underneath the official entries, someone had scrawled additional notes in different handwriting. Desperate scratches that grew more erratic with each line. Day 12, they're wearing Ranger Johnson's face now, but they forgot how to blink. Always staring. Always watching. Day 15, found my own footprints leading back to camp. But I never walked that path. The prints are deeper than mine, heavier. Day 18, the radio works, but only picks up voices from 1962. They're discussing missing hikers that won't disappear for 30 years. Day 21, counted 48 different versions of myself standing around the perimeter last night. One waved, it knew my name. The final entry was just numbers, 48, 48, 48, 48, 48, 48, 48. Repeated until the pen had torn through the paper. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the roof. Slow. Deliberate. Like someone was walking very carefully, testing each step. But the thing is, ranger stations have peaked roofs. You can't walk on them, not without sliding off. The footsteps stopped directly above me. Then, nothing. Just that oppressive silence again. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, holding my breath, waiting. Finally, I grabbed a more recent-looking map from the desk and got out of there. But as I reached the door, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the door to where I'd been standing, then back to the door. My footprints. But I hadn't left any mud when I came in. My shoes had been clean. And these prints, they were slightly larger than mine, like someone had been stretching my feet just a little bit every time they touched the ground. My car started fine, but as I drove away, I swear I saw someone in the rearview mirror, standing in the station doorway, except the proportions were wrong, too tall, arms too long, and it wasn't moving like a person moves. It was swaying, like kelp in an ocean current. I didn't stop, didn't look back again, just kept driving deeper into whatever this place was. The road ended at a clearing that shouldn't have existed. Oregon forests don't just open up like that. It was perfectly circular, maybe 300 feet across, covered in grass so green it looked artificial. In the center stood a single massive oak tree. Not a Douglas fir or cedar like everything else out here. An oak, ancient and gnarled, branches spreading out like neural pathways against the gray sky. But oaks don't grow at this elevation. They just don't. Carved into its trunk was 48, but this wasn't like the others. This was huge, each number 10 feet tall, cut so deep I could see amber sap weeping from the wounds. The sap looked fresh, but the cuts themselves were old. Centuries, maybe. The bark grown thick and ropey around them. I parked at the edge of the clearing. Don't ask me why I got out. I don't have a good answer, maybe curiosity. Maybe something else. Something that felt like my own idea, but probably wasn't. The grass crunched under my feet. Not the soft give of normal grass, but brittle, like walking on insect shells. The air tasted metallic, like pennies on your tongue, or blood. As I got closer to the oak, I noticed things hanging from its branches. At first, I thought they were some kind of fruit or seed pod, but they were camping gear, backpacks, tents. Some looked modern, technical fabrics in bright colors. Others were old canvas, military surplus maybe. All of them were 48 feet up, hung with precision at exactly the same height. How did I know it was exactly 48 feet? I don't know, I just knew. The same way you know your own name. Under the tree, the grass was different. Patterns in it, like crop circles but smaller, more intricate. Spirals within spirals, and in the very center, right at the base of the oak, a hole, maybe 3 feet across, perfectly round, edges so smooth they looked machined. I got close enough to peer down into it. The walls were lined with roots, but not from the oak. These were wrong, gray-white, pulsing slightly like veins. The hole went down further than my phone's flashlight could reach. But there was something at the edge of the light, movement, rhythmic, like breathing, and then I saw them, embedded in the root walls. Faces, human faces, partially absorbed into the organic matter. Their eyes were closed, but their mouths moved silently like they were whispering secrets to the darkness below. Some still had hair, some just smooth skin stretched over bone. They were all at different stages of integration. Some almost completely consumed by the roots, others still disturbingly fresh. I recognized one of them, the forest ranger from a missing person poster I'd seen at the station. He'd disappeared in 2003. His face was turned toward me, lips moving in perfect synchronization with the breathing rhythm from the depths. That's when I heard the sound. Not from the hole, from everywhere, a low vibration that made my teeth ache. It wasn't quite sound and wasn't quite feeling, but something between the two. Like the whole clearing was humming at a frequency just below human hearing. Then the smell hit me. Sweet rot. Like fruit that's gone too soft, mixed with something chemical. Formaldehyde, maybe. It got stronger near the hole, strong enough to make my eyes water. I backed away, and that's when I saw them. The photographs. Someone had nailed Polaroids to the oak's trunk. Dozens of them, all showing the same thing. The clearing, but at different times, different seasons. And in each one, someone was standing by the hole. The same position, the same pose, arms at their sides, facing the camera, expression blank. But the people were wrong. In some photos they looked normal, in others they were blurred, stretched, like the film had been exposed twice. In the most recent-looking ones, they weren't quite people anymore. The shapes were right, but the details were off. Like an AI trying to generate a human face but not quite getting it right. The last photo showed someone I recognized, the ranger from the station's doorway. Except in the photo, taken in bright daylight, I could see what was wrong with them. Their skin didn't fit right, like they were wearing someone else's body as a coat. I turned to leave and froze. My car was gone, not stolen, not moved, gone, like it had never been there. The grass where I'd parked was undisturbed. No tire tracks. Nothing. But I could hear an engine, my Tesla's distinctive whine, coming from below, from under the clearing. The humming got louder, the smell got stronger, and then, very clearly, I heard my own voice, from the hole, calling my name. Marcus, come down. It's safe. Marcus, but I hadn't said anything, and the voice, while it had my exact tone and cadence, was saying words I'd never spoken, would never speak, because what it said next made my blood freeze. Marcus, you've been down here for 48 hours. You need to come back down. Your body is starting to reject the changes. I ran. I crashed through the forest for what felt like hours. No path, no direction. Just away from that clearing, from that hole, from whatever was speaking with my voice. The trees here were different from the ones near the road. Older, stranger, their trunks twisted in spirals that hurt to look at directly. Some grew into each other, fused at impossible angles. Others had holes through them, perfect circles like the one under the oak, but horizontal, as if something had punched through them long ago. The 48 markers were everywhere now, carved into bark, arranged in stones, spelled out in broken branches. One clearing had 48 dead birds arranged in a perfect circle. Another had 48 shoes, All left feet, all different sizes and styles, some so old they were just leather scraps. I tried to mark my path, breaking branches, scuffing distinctive marks in the dirt. But when I looked back, the forest had healed itself, branches whole, ground undisturbed, like I'd never been there at all. Then I found the neighborhood. I know how that sounds. A neighborhood in the middle of nowhere, 48 miles from Portland where no roads go. But there it was. 6 houses arranged in a cul-de-sac. Suburban ranch styles from the 1960s. Perfect lawns, white picket fences, mailboxes with names like Johnson and Smith and Williams. Every porch light was on, even though it was... Wait, what time was it? I checked my phone, 2:17 p.m., but the sky was dark. Not overcast dark, night dark. Stars visible through gaps in the canopy. But they were wrong too. Constellations I didn't recognize. Too many stars. Moving too fast. I approached the first house. Through the window, I could see a family having dinner. Normal-looking people. Mom, Dad, 2 kids, passing dishes, laughing. But they weren't eating. The food never reached their mouths. Just the same motions. Over and over, like a loop. Reach for the potatoes, pass them left, laugh. Reach for the potatoes, pass them left, laugh. The next house was the same, family watching TV. But the TV wasn't on. They sat in darkness, staring at a black screen, occasionally laughing at jokes that weren't there. The dad held a remote, thumb pressing the same button repeatedly. Click. Click, click. No batteries in it. In the third house, everyone was standing. All 4 family members. In the living room. Facing the wall. Not moving. Not breathing that I could see. Just standing. Waiting. I was about to check the 4th house when I heard a door open behind me. Marcus? I turned. A woman stood on the porch of the first house. Middle-aged, suburban mom clothes, smile too wide. Marcus, you're just in time for dinner. We've been waiting for you. I'm not? How do you know my name? Her head tilted, just a little too far. You've always lived here, Marcus. House number 48, don't you remember? The other doors started opening, people filing out. All smiling those too wide smiles, all walking toward me with that same slightly wrong gait, like marionettes with invisible strings. Come home, Marcus. We kept your room just how you left it, 48 years ago. Or was it 48 hours? Time works differently here. They formed a circle around me, close but not touching. Their eyes were normal at first glance, but if you looked closer, the pupils were wrong. Square, like old TV screens. You can't leave, Marcus. No one leaves. The forest won't let you. It needs 48. Always 48. One leaves, one replaces. That's the rule. The woman reached for me. Her hand looked normal until it got close. Then I saw the fingers had too many joints, like spider legs pretending to be human digits. I ducked under her arm and ran between 2 houses, into the backyard, and stopped dead. The backyards were connected, all of them, one massive space, and in the center, another hole, bigger than the one under the oak, maybe 20 feet across, and standing around it, things that used to be people. They still wore clothes, still had human shapes, but they'd been stretched. Arms too long, torsos too thin, faces pulled like taffy. They stood in a circle, holding hands, swaying to that same low humming I'd heard at the oak. One of them turned to look at me. Its face had been a man's once. I could still see traces, a mustache, wrinkles, a scar on the chin, but the features had migrated, eyes on the forehead, mouth where the nose should be, nose just gone. It spoke, not with its misplaced mouth, but from somewhere inside its chest. "You're early. The 48th hour isn't for another... Oh, you're not one of the new ones. You're still..." It paused, studying me. "You're still wearing your first body." The circle broke. They moved toward me, not walking, but gliding. Feet not quite touching the ground. Their long arms reached out. Fingers extending further than fingers should. "Don't run. It hurts less if you don't run. The forest picked you. 48 always finds its 48. Just let it happen." I ran anyway. I found my car 3 hours later. Or maybe it was 3 minutes or 3 days. Time wasn't working right anymore. My phone showed 2:17 p.m. Still. The battery was at 48%. Had been since I'd entered the clearing. The Tesla sat in a different clearing, one I hadn't seen before. Engine running, doors open, keys in the ignition. But I hadn't left the keys. I'd had them in my pocket the whole time. I checked. They were still there. Same keys, same car. 2 sets of the same thing. Inside the car, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for the driver's seat. Someone had adjusted it, someone taller, and on the dashboard, a note, my handwriting. But I hadn't written it. "Marcus, by the time you read this, you'll have been here for 48 iterations. I know it doesn't feel that way. The first time never does. You think this is your first time finding the car. It's not. Check the odometer." I checked. The car had 48,000 more miles than when I'd started this morning. Impossible. But the wear was there. Seats worn down. Steering wheel smooth where hands had gripped it. My hands. The note continued. "The forest doesn't trap people. It replaces them. Every 48 hours it creates a new version, a better version, one that fits this place. You're not the first, Marcus. You won't be the last. Look in the trunk. I didn't want to, but I did. 47 phones, all mine, all with the same case, same crack in the screen protector. Different stages of decay. The oldest was just components. Scattered. Grown over with something that looked like moss but probably wasn't." Another note. Older, paper yellowed. "We figured it out too late. The Forest Service. This place is a processing center. Has been since before humans walked upright. It takes people, improves them, sends them back. No one notices because the copy is perfect. Better than perfect. It knows everything the original knew, does everything better, more efficient, more productive, less emotional. Stop reading, run, get to Portland. 48 miles. You have 48 minutes once you understand. After that, the next you wakes up. 48 minutes, starting... When? When I understood. Understood what? Then I saw it. In the trees. Watching me. Me. Not something that looked like me. Me. Same clothes, same face, same confused expression. But standing too still. Breathing too evenly. It smiled. My smile. But held too long. "Hello, Marcus. I'm Marcus. The better Marcus. The one who fits. You can go now. I'll take it from here." Take what? "Your life, your job, your apartment. Your friends will like me better. I laugh at their jokes. I don't forget birthdays. I don't get tired at parties. I'm you, but optimized." More of them emerged from the trees. All me. Different versions. One in a suit. Probably, for the conference, one in hiking gear. One in pajamas. Dozens. All watching. All waiting. "It doesn't hurt," Suit Marcus said. "You just stop, and we continue. The forest gets its 48. Always needs 48 originals here, feeding it, keeping it stable. Why?" My voice cracked. "Why 48? They all tilted their heads. Same angle, same time, because that's how many it takes. 48 sources to maintain the network. 48 originals to create infinite copies. You're number 48. You've always been number 48. Every time you come here, you're 48. I got in the car, slammed it in reverse. They didn't chase, just watched, knowing something I didn't. The road appeared, smooth, paved. A straight shot back to Highway 26, 48 miles to Portland. The GPS worked. Full signal. ETA, 48 minutes. I drove, fast as the Tesla would go. The forest blurred past, normal trees, normal sounds, birds, wind, life, the nightmare fading like a dream, like something that couldn't have been real. 40 miles out. I started forgetting details. The faces in the neighborhood, the thing under the oak, the way my copies moved. 30 miles out. I couldn't remember why I was driving so fast. Something about a ranger station, a clearing. 20 miles out. I knew I'd taken a detour, seen something weird. But lots of things are weird in the Oregon forests. That's why tourists come. 10 miles out. I felt great. Better than great. Energized, like I'd been remade, refreshed, updated. 5 miles from Portland. I called my girlfriend. Told her about the beautiful drive, the amazing scenery, how I'd found this perfect little spot about 48 miles out, how we should go camping there sometime. 1 mile from Portland. I checked my mirrors. Clear. Nothing following me. But in the reflection, my eyes looked different. Just for a second. Square pupils. Like old TV screens. I made it to the conference, gave my presentation, killed it. Everyone said I seemed different, more confident, more focused, more optimized. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been having dreams, the same dream every night. I'm standing in a clearing, by a hole, holding hands with 47 other people, all wearing my face. And we're humming, that low vibration that's not quite sound, calling to someone. The next number, 48. They're driving down Highway 26 right now. They see a handwritten sign, Scenic Overlook, 8 miles. They're about to turn. And here's the thing that keeps me awake, staring at my ceiling at 2:17 a.m. every night. I don't think I made it out. I think I'm still there, standing in that circle, swaying, humming, while something else, something better, something that fits, is living my life, using my name, sleeping in my bed, and doing a better job of being me than I ever did. Want to know the worst part? I caught myself writing a sign yesterday, didn't remember starting it. Just found myself in my garage, paintbrush in hand, wooden board in front of me. Scenic Overlook, 8 miles. My handwriting. But I didn't write it. Or maybe I did. Maybe the me that's still in that forest, still standing by that hole. Maybe it reaches through sometimes. Maybe it's reaching through right now, making me tell you this story, warning you or inviting you, because I just checked my GPS. And you know what's exactly 48 miles from Portland? Everything, if you know how to measure it right. If you know which roads to take, which signs to follow. The forest is always looking for number 48. And if you're listening to this, lying in your bed, feeling that drowsy pull of sleep, let me ask you something. Do you remember taking any scenic detours lately? Any drives where the GPS cut out? Any moments where time didn't work quite right? Check your odometer. Check your phone battery. Count the miles from Portland. Because here's the thing about the 48. It's not a number. It's a cycle. And cycles, they always come back around. But there's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. Something I discovered last night when I couldn't sleep and found myself digging through old emails. I found correspondence from myself. Emails I don't remember sending, to people I don't remember meeting. All sent at 2:17 a.m., all containing the same message. The 48 is complete. Beginning next phase. Integration successful. The recipients? Other developers. Other tech workers. All from different cities. All 48 miles from major population centers. Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, Austin. Each one had taken a similar detour. Each one had found their own scenic overlook. Each one had come back optimized. We're not random victims. We're the chosen. Selected for specific traits, technical skills, social connections, access to networks and systems. The forest isn't just replacing people, it's building something. A web of perfect copies spread across the country. And tonight, at 2:17 a.m., I'm going to send my own emails to 48 new addresses. People who work in infrastructure, government, media. The message is already written. I can see it on my screen even though I haven't typed it yet. The network is ready. Phase 2 begins at dawn. Welcome to the 48. I'm trying to fight it, trying not to send those emails. But my fingers are already moving toward the keyboard, and part of me, the optimized part, knows this is right, this is evolution, this is improvement. Humanity 2.0 powered by something ancient that's been waiting in the dark spaces between trees, collecting the best of us and making us better. Sweet dreams. And if you hear humming tonight, that low vibration just below human hearing, whatever you do, don't count to 48. Don't look at your clock at 2:17. And definitely don't check if there's a new scenic overlook sign on Highway 26, because once you know about the 48, you're already part of it. The forest knows you now, and it's waiting. We're all waiting, at exactly 48 miles from everywhere that matters. Story number 4. The scratching started at 3:33 a.m. every single night, without fail. And I'm not talking about mice in the walls or old pipes settling. I'm talking about deliberate rhythmic scratching that spelled out the same 3 numbers over and over again. 3, 3, 3. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you why you should never, ever book room 333 at the Cecil Hotel. And before you say it's been renovated, before you tell me it's the stay on Main now, trust me. Some things don't change with a fresh coat of paint and new management. If you're listening to this in bed right now, maybe turn on a light. Just a suggestion. Because what I'm about to tell you happened last month, October 2024, and the Cecil Hotel, or whatever they're calling it these days, is still very much in business. The story starts now. I should have known something was wrong when my editor at the LA Times handed me this assignment with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sarah," she said, tapping her manicured nails on her desk, "you wanted a big story, right? Something to really sink your teeth into?" The folder she slid across felt heavier than it should have. Inside were reservation details for the Cecil Hotel, specifically room 333, and a collection of police reports dating back decades. Not from the 14th floor where Elisa Lamb met her tragic end. No, these were all from the 3rd floor, all from the same room. "We've had 3 journalists try this story already," my editor continued, her voice dropping. "None of them finished it." "What happened to them?" I asked. She shrugged. "One quit journalism entirely. Became a kindergarten teacher in Portland. Another checked himself into therapy and won't talk about it. The third," she paused. "The third just sent back a one-word email, no." What she didn't tell me then, what I found out later, was that all 3 journalists had been found in their homes 3 days after their failed attempts, sitting in corners scratching numbers into their arms. Not 333. Different numbers, sequential numbers, like they were continuing some invisible count that only they could see. I should have walked away right then. Should have handed back that folder and stuck to covering city council meetings and restaurant openings. But I've always been too curious for my own good. And besides, How bad could one hotel room really be? The Cecil Hotel sits on Main Street in downtown LA like a brick tombstone. All Art Deco architecture and faded glamour. Most people know about Elisa Lam. Some know about Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker who lived there in the 80s. But room 333? That's the Cecil's best-kept secret. I checked in on a Tuesday afternoon. The lobby had been renovated. All modern fixtures and hipster coffee bar vibes, but you could still feel it. That heaviness in the air, like the building itself was holding its breath. The desk clerk, a young guy named Marcus with gauged ears and sleeve tattoos, barely looked up from his computer. "Room 333, I said, sliding my credit card across the marble counter. His fingers froze over the keyboard. For the first time, he actually looked at me. Really looked at me. "You sure about that room?" "Why? Is there something wrong with it?" Marcus glanced around the empty lobby, then leaned in closer. "Look, I'm not supposed to say anything, but we usually keep that room vacant. Corporate policy. Then why did they accept my reservation?" He shrugged, but I caught the way his hand trembled slightly as he programmed my keycard. Above my pay grade, but he hesitated. "If you need anything, and I mean anything, you call the front desk immediately. Ask for me specifically. I'm here until midnight." What Marcus didn't mention was the notebook he kept hidden behind the counter. Later, when I went through the hotel's records, I found it. 3 years' worth of entries. Every person who stayed in room 333. What time they checked in, what time they left, and most importantly, how they left. Some walked out normally, others ran. A few had to be carried out by paramedics, and three never left at all. Their names were still on the guest registry, marked as extended stay, but their rooms had been empty for months. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt longer than it should have. The numbers above the door flickered. 1, 2, and then darkness for a solid 3 seconds before the 3 finally illuminated. The doors opened with a grinding sound that made my teeth ache. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by those awful fluorescent lights that make everything look slightly green. Room 333 was at the very end. Of course it was. Past a dozen other doors that all seemed firmly, deliberately closed. But as I walked down that hallway, I noticed something odd. The carpet showed wear patterns from years of foot traffic, but there were 3 distinct paths. Not random scuffing, but deliberate trails. As if people had walked the same routes over and over again. One path led from the elevator to room 333. The second went from room 333 to the stairwell. And the third was just a circle. Starting and ending at room 333's door. Like someone had paced the same circuit hundreds of times. My keycard worked on the 3rd try. The lock made a sound like a sigh when it finally disengaged. The room itself looked normal. Disappointingly so. Queen bed with white linens, flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, mini-fridge humming in the corner. The only unusual thing was the temperature. It had to be at least 10 degrees colder than the hallway. I set my overnight bag on the bed and pulled out my laptop, voice recorder, and the folder of police reports. If I was going to figure out what made this room special, I needed to start with the facts. The first report was from 1947. A traveling salesman named Eugene Walsh had been found in the room, alive but catatonic, scratching the number 333 into his own arm with his fingernails. He never spoke again. The second was from 1963. A honeymoon couple, the Johnsons from Nebraska, had fled the room in the middle of the night claiming someone, or something, had been standing at the foot of their bed, counting. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Over and over again. 1978 brought a suicide. 1985, another. 1991, A woman named Patricia Helms had barricaded herself in the bathroom and called 911 17 times, insisting that the walls were breathing. Each call had been exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds long. The most recent report was from 2019. A travel blogger named Mike Chen had live-streamed his stay in the room. The stream cut out at exactly 3:33 a.m. When security checked on him the next morning, they found him sitting in the corner, fully dressed, his phone battery dead despite being plugged in. He'd typed the same message in his notes app over 3,000 times. It's in the walls. I looked up from the reports and realized the sun had set. The room was dark except for the pale glow of my laptop screen. That's when I heard it for the first time. A soft tap, then another, then a third. Tap, 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 coming from inside the wall behind the headboard. I told myself it was the pipes. Old building, old plumbing. These things happen. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, the tapping became more insistent, more deliberate. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I pressed my ear against the wall. The sound stopped immediately, like whatever was making it knew I was listening. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. My phone buzzed, making me jump. A text from an unknown number. You should leave. Before I could respond, another text. Room 333 doesn't like journalists. And then a third, ask Marcus about the girl in 1999. I called down to the front desk. Marcus answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. You got the text too, huh? He said before I could speak. How did you? Everyone who stays in that room gets them. Different numbers every time. We've tried to trace them, but... He paused. The numbers don't exist. Never have. Tell me about 1999, the girl. I heard him sigh. Her name was Amanda Price, 16 years old, runaway from Phoenix. She snuck into the hotel and somehow got into room 333, back when we actually kept it locked. They found her 3 days later. Dead? Worse, alive, but changed. She'd scratched every single surface in that room with the number 3. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, even the inside of the toilet tank. Her fingernails were completely gone, worn down to nothing. She said, he paused again. She said the room told her to do it, said it needed to mark its territory. The tapping started again while we were still on the phone, this time from the ceiling. You hear that? I asked Marcus. Hear what? But I knew he was lying. I could hear it in his voice. That forced casualness that people use when they're trying very hard not to acknowledge something. I hung up and decided to be systematic about this. I pulled out my voice recorder and started documenting everything. The time, 9:47 p.m. The temperature, 58 degrees according to my phone, though my breath wasn't visible. The tapping, consistent intervals of 3 followed by 3-second pauses. That's when the TV turned on by itself. Static filled the screen, but not random static. It was moving in patterns, swirling, almost like it was trying to form shapes or numbers. I grabbed the remote to turn it off. The buttons didn't work. I tried unplugging it from the wall. The screen stayed on. And then, through the static, I heard it. A voice, barely audible, counting. 1, 2, 3, over and over. 1, 2, 3. I did what any rational person would do. I grabbed my things and headed for the door. It wouldn't open. My keycard didn't work. The handle wouldn't turn. I pulled and pushed and threw my shoulder against it, but the door might as well have been a wall. My phone had no signal. The landline was dead. I was trapped. The tapping grew louder, not just from the walls now, but from everywhere. The floor, the ceiling, the bathroom pipes, all in perfect synchronization. Tap, tap, tap. And then, At exactly 10:33 p.m., everything stopped. The TV went dark. The tapping ceased. The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the corner where the bathroom door met the wall. I hadn't seen her arrive. She was just suddenly there. Like she'd always been there and I'd only now noticed. She couldn't have been more than 16. Shoulder-length brown hair that looked wet even though it wasn't. A faded hotel bathrobe that might have been white once, but was now the color of old newspaper. And her fingers. God, her fingers. They were nothing but raw, red stumps. "You're Amanda," I whispered. "Amanda Price." She tilted her head in a way that wasn't quite human. Too far. Too smooth. Like her neck was on a swivel. "I was," she said, and her voice sounded like it was coming from inside the walls rather than from her mouth. "Now I'm just another number." She took a step forward, and I noticed she wasn't walking exactly, more like gliding, her feet never quite touching the floor. "Room 333 collects things," she continued, moving closer. "Collects people, but only certain people, the ones who count. I don't understand." She smiled, and I wished she hadn't. Her teeth were all wrong. There were too many of them. "You've been counting your whole life, Sarah. Counting words for your articles. Counting minutes until deadlines. Counting the days since your sister died." My blood went cold. I'd never told anyone about Rachel, not even my editor. She'd died 3 years ago. 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days ago, to be exact. "How do you—" "The room knows. It's been waiting for you, someone who understands the importance of threes." She was close enough now that I could smell her, like copper pennies and mold. "Did you know," she said, "that humans can only consciously track 3 things at once? 3 is the number of stability. Think of a tripod. 3 is the number of storytelling, beginning, middle, end. 3 is the number of attempts before something becomes a pattern." The tapping started again, but this time I realized it wasn't random. It was Morse code. 3 short taps, 3 long taps, 3 short taps. SOS. "That's not me," Amanda said, noticing my recognition. "That's all the others. The ones who came before. The ones who never left. But I read the reports. People have left this room. They survived." She laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "Their bodies left." "But count the reports again, Sarah. Really count them. How many people checked into room 333 over the years? And how many reports are in that folder?" I thought back to the documents. 7 reports. 7 incidents over nearly 80 years. But this was the Cecil Hotel. Hundreds of thousands of guests over the decades. "Where are the others?" I asked. Amanda pointed at the walls. "Listen," and I did. Past the tapping, past the hum of the air conditioner, past my own panicked breathing. I heard them, whispers. Dozens, no, hundreds of voices, all counting. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Different languages, different ages, all counting to 3. "The room needs 333, Amanda said. "It's been collecting for so long. You're number 332. "No," I backed away until I hit the bed. "No, I'm leaving. I'm getting out of here." "You can try," she said, and suddenly she wasn't in front of me anymore. She was everywhere, in the mirrors, in the TV screen, in the reflection on my laptop. But the room has rules. 3 rules, actually. Would you like to hear them? I didn't answer, but she told me anyway. Rule 1. You can only leave if someone takes your place. Rule 2. You can only leave between 3:33 and 3:36 a.m. Rule 3. She paused, and all her reflections smiled at once. Rule 3 is the fun one. You can leave if you can make the room forget your number. How do I do that? Figure it out. You have... She looked at a watch that wasn't there. 5 hours and 17 minutes. Better start counting. And then she was gone. All of her. The room was empty except for me and the whispers in the walls. I spent the next 3 hours trying everything. I tried breaking the window. My laptop bounced off like it was made of rubber. I tried calling out for help. My voice seemed to die just inches from my mouth. I even tried setting off the smoke alarm. The detector didn't even beep. At 1 a.m., the whispers changed. They weren't just counting anymore. They were telling stories, fragments of last words, final thoughts, desperate prayers. Please, I have children. This can't be real. Someone help me. And over again. 3, 3, 3. I started writing everything down, looking for a pattern. The dates of the incidents, the names of the victims, their ages, their room numbers. Wait, room numbers. I pulled out the police reports again. Eugene Walsh had been in room 333, obviously, but there was a note in the margin. He'd originally booked room 222 but asked to switch. The Johnsons had been moved from room 111 due to a plumbing issue. Patricia Helms had specifically requested a room on the 3rd floor. They'd all been drawn here, just like me. I looked at my own reservation. I'd booked room 301 originally, but when I'd called to confirm, they'd said there was an upgrade available. The room didn't just collect people, it called them. At 2:15 a.m., I found something else. Scratched into the bottom of the desk drawer, so faint I almost missed it. The room remembers everything except what it never knew. What had Amanda said? I needed to make the room forget my number. But how do you make something forget a number it assigned to you? Unless... I thought about my sister, Rachel. She'd been a mathematician before the accident. Obsessed with number theory. She used to say that numbers only had the meaning we gave them. 3 is just a symbol, she'd told me once. It only means 3, because we all agree that's what it means. Change the agreement, change the meaning. At 3 a.m., the room started to change. The walls began to pulse. Slowly at first, like a heartbeat, then faster. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't speaking English anymore, or any language I recognized. It was older than language, pre-verbal. The sound of pure need. The TV turned on again, but this time it showed me. Not me in the room. Me from earlier today, checking in. Me from yesterday, getting the assignment. Me from last week, last month, last year. My whole life played backwards in 3-second intervals. And then I saw her, Rachel, not a memory, really her, standing where Amanda had stood. "You figured it out yet?" she asked, and her voice was exactly as I remembered. "You're not real. Real is relative in room 333. I'm as real as your guilt. As real as the way you count the days since I died. As real as the fact that you were supposed to be in the car with me that night. Stop. 3 years, 3 months, 3 days. You counted every morning. The room heard you counting. That's why it wants you. The walls were breathing now. In and out. In and out. In sets of 3. But here's what the room doesn't know," Rachel continued. "It doesn't know that I forgive you. It doesn't know that the accident wasn't your fault. It doesn't know that you've been torturing yourself with the wrong number." "What do you mean?" "You count the days since I died." "But what about the days I lived? What about the 11,680 days we had together? That's not divisible by 3, Sarah. It's a prime number multiplied by an even number. It breaks the pattern." I understood then. The room fed on patterns, on 3s, on perfect divisions. But life isn't perfect. It's messy and prime and indivisible. I grabbed the hotel stationery and started writing. Not the days since Rachel died, but the days she lived. Every birthday, every shared joke, every fight we had and made up from. Every moment that didn't fit into a neat pattern of 3. The room didn't like it. The walls stopped pulsing. The whispers turned to screams. The TV exploded in a shower of sparks. And then I heard it. The lock on the door, a soft click. I looked at my phone. 3:33 a.m. I had 3 minutes. But when I reached for the door handle, Amanda was there again. Not gliding this time. Solid, real, angry. "You can't break the pattern," she hissed. "No one breaks the pattern. Watch me." I pushed past her, through her. She felt like ice water and regret. And grabbed the handle. It turned. The door opened. The hallway beyond looked different. Older. The fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by gas lamps. The carpet was different. Art Deco patterns in burgundy and gold. This wasn't the Cecil Hotel anymore. This was the Cecil as it had been, as it remembered itself. "You leave now," Amanda said behind me, "and someone else becomes 332. The room will just wait for another 333. The pattern continues." I turned back to look at her. She seemed smaller somehow, younger. Just a scared kid who'd made the mistake of entering the wrong room. "Then we break the pattern completely," I said. I pulled out my phone and did something I should have done hours ago. I started a live stream, not to my personal account, to the LA Times official social media. We had millions of followers. "This is Sarah Martinez reporting live from room 333 at the Cecil Hotel," I said to the camera. "And I'm about to show you something that will change everything you thought you knew about this place." I turned the camera toward the room, showed them Amanda, showed them the walls that were now visibly pulsing, showed them the hundreds of scratched 3s that were appearing and disappearing like living things. The view count climbed, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. "The room needs secrecy," I said to Amanda. "It needs to be forgotten to keep collecting. But what happens when everyone knows? What happens when the whole world is watching?" Amanda's eyes widened. "You don't know what you're doing." "I'm doing what journalists do. I'm telling the truth." The live stream hit 100,000 viewers. Comments flooded in. People started sharing their own stories about the Cecil, about rooms that felt wrong, about counting that wouldn't stop. The room began to shake. Not like an earthquake, like something trying to hold itself together and failing. "Get out!" Amanda screamed, but not at me. At the walls, at the room itself. "Get out of my head!" And I understood. She wasn't the room's servant, she was its prisoner. Just like all the others. The view count passed 300,000, 330,000, 333,000. The room exploded. Not literally. But all the lights burst at once. All the whispers became a single, deafening roar. And then, silence. When the emergency lights kicked in, I was standing in a normal hotel room. No scratches on the walls, no impossible reflections. No Amanda. My phone was dead. The live stream had cut off. But it had been enough. I walked out of room 333 at 3:36 a.m. The hallway was normal again. Modern, renovated, empty. Marcus was waiting by the elevator, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one night. "The whole 3rd floor lost power," he said. "The whole building felt it." "What did you do?" "I told everyone it's secret. Turns out room 333 really doesn't like journalists after all." I checked out immediately. Didn't even go back for my laptop. The LA Times could buy me a new one. The story I filed the next day was edited. Heavily. My editor said no one would believe the truth. So we published something about the hotel's history, its renovations, its alleged hauntings. The kind of story that gets clicks but doesn't get you committed. but the live stream had been saved. Screen recorded by thousands of viewers before it cut out. Within hours, it was everywhere. Reddit, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. The comments section was a mixture of skeptics calling it elaborate CGI and believers sharing their own supernatural encounters. 3 days after the story published, I got a call from Dr. Margaret Chen, Mike Chen's sister, the blogger who'd live-streamed from room 333 in 2019. She was a psychiatrist in San Francisco, and she'd been following my story with growing concern. "My brother never recovered," she told me over coffee. "Not completely. He functions, he works, he has relationships, but every night at 3:33 a.m. he wakes up. He doesn't know why, he just wakes up and stares at the wall for exactly 3 minutes." She pulled out her phone and showed me a video. Her brother sleeping peacefully, then suddenly sitting bolt upright at exactly 3:33 a.m. His eyes were open but vacant, unfocused. He sat perfectly still for 3 minutes, then lay back down and returned to normal sleep. "He's been doing this for 5 years," she said, "every single night. He doesn't remember it in the morning." I thought about the 3 journalists who tried to cover room 333 before me, about their strange behaviors afterward, about the sequential numbers they'd scratched into their arms. "Dr. Chen," I said carefully, "what if some of them never really left the room?" Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "What do you mean? What if part of them is still there? Still counting? And what if breaking the room's hold doesn't free everyone, just redirects the pattern?" That night, for the first time in years, I didn't count the days since Rachel's death. But at 3:33 a.m., I woke up anyway. Not from a sound or a dream, just a sudden, inexplicable awareness that something had changed. I looked out my bedroom window. Across the street in the apartment building opposite mine, 3 windows were lit, all on different floors, all perfectly aligned. And in each window I could see a figure, sitting, staring, waiting. They were counting. But here's what really keeps me up at night. And I need you to tell me in the comments if you've experienced this too. Have you started seeing 3s everywhere since you began reading? Because I've gotten messages from dozens of readers saying the same thing. License plates with 333 waking up at 3:33. Receipts totaling $33.30. Is it just confirmation bias? Or did room 333 find a new way to spread? The hotel officially closed room 333 last week. Permanently. They've converted it into storage space. But storage for what? And why do the housekeeping staff refuse to go near that end of the hallway? Marcus quit his job 3 days after my stay. He left Los Angeles entirely, moved back home to Oregon. But he still sends me texts, always at 3:33 a.m. Always the same message: it's spreading. And maybe it is. Maybe that's what this story really is. Not a warning, but a transmission. A way for the pattern to reach new people, new counters, new collectors. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've had your own experience with the Cecil Hotel, or any room that felt wrong, share your story. Because I don't think room 333 was unique. I think it was just the beginning. And every night, as I lie in bed fighting the urge to count, I remember Amanda's last words before she disappeared. The pattern spreads. Maybe she wasn't talking about the room's influence. Maybe she was talking about this story, about you, reading, counting, 3 paragraphs, 3 sections, 3 words that keep echoing in your mind. Room 333, sweet dreams. And if you hear tapping tonight in sets of 3, well, don't say I didn't warn you.